Do you find it hard to learn new words and phrases in your target language? You might find that you learn a new word or phrase, and then a few days later you've forgotten it, and it's really annoying because you thought that you knew it and you've been looking at it, you've been studying it, and then it disappears from your brain. Research shows that it can take 7 or more attempts to learn a word before it gets assigned to your long-term memory, so it can take a while. However, in this video, I'm going to cover why that is the case and why you need so many repetitions of learning a new word before it gets stuck to your long-term memory, which means that you actually learn the word once it's in your long-term memory. I'm also going to cover advice and tips on how you can speed up this process and make it easier for you to learn new words and phrases. My name is James, I'm a native English speaker, puedo hablar español, y anche posso parlare italiano. I help people reach a conversational level in a different language. Point number 1, your mind doesn't automatically learn new words the first time it hears or sees them. What happens is it takes a lot of repetitions for your mind to consider something as important, and that's from a survival perspective. Essentially, our bodies like to conserve energy where possible, so we don't want to use energy on things that we don't need. So any new information that our mind doesn't deem as being relevant, it gets rid of. That's because the brain puts more importance on learning words and phrases that it thinks will be useful for survival. For example, finding out how to get food and water and shelter. Words relevant for that will be repeated a lot of times in conversation, as our ancestors would have done years ago. So in order to be efficient and conserve energy and not waste it, our brain needs to know, is this word super important? Is it something I'll need to know? And for that to happen, it has to hear it a certain amount of times in conversation when you're speaking to different people. So a common word might be and. That word is a connective, but it's used loads between obviously connecting different subjects together. But it's used a lot in conversation and can allow you to say more than one topic at once. It's quite a niche example, but imagine how many times you say and in a sentence or when talking to someone. I did this and that, and if you do X, Y, Z and that, you connect it and you use it a lot. So with that being said, the brain stores it as a really useful word. Whereas the word hippopotamus, as a random example I know, it might not be as useful unless you're working with animals like that. On that note, I've created a free email course on how to learn a language despite having a busy lifestyle. It contains a range of tips and tricks and works for any language, suitable for all levels, and it helps you achieve your language goals in less time if you're really busy. There's a link in the description below to check it out. So in general, if you're trying to learn words in your target language that are quite niche or not very important to you, it's naturally going to be hard unless you repeat it a lot of times during conversation or you use it while you're practicing the language. So essentially, any words you repeat a lot, your brain thinks it's important, so it learns it. Any words that you've learned once but you've not really used it anymore, your brain thinks, well, he's not used it, or he or she hasn't used it much, so what we're going to do, I might as well just delete it. So it doesn't get assigned to your long-term memory. It's in your short-term memory, but not your long-term memory. So a quick one on this, your short-term memory is the first place it goes to, or a new word or any new information you learn, where it could be useful in the sort of short term, like a few hours or days. However, long-term memory is something where it gets stored for that's easily retrievable on the long term. So if your brain deems a word to be important, then it saves it to long-term memory, which means that months down the line you can recall it. Now, second point is leading on from this. So one thing that you can do to help your brain mark a word or some new information as important is spaced repetition. So definition of spaced repetition is you're reviewing the word at increasing intervals. So this applies to both words and phrases or any new information. So first of all, you might learn a word and then one day later, you'll review it again. Cool. Then you wait 3 days after that to review it again. Then 7 days, then 10 days. And you don't review it, you don't have to review it in between. You just do it at a spaced interval because that means that as you're about to forget it, you then recall it again and you tell your brain, look, this word's important, don't forget it. And as soon as you learn it in the near future, you're more likely to forget it because it's only in your short-term memory. However, if you increase that interval, so after 3 days, you're saying, by the way, brain, send this to my long-term memory, create a new neural pathway in my brain so that I remember it more. Then it's like, okay, cool. Then 7 days passes and you do it again. You're like, oh, by the way, a few days ago, you might have forgotten this, but here you go, here it is again, you need it. And then you just increase it like that. However, if you're practicing your target language, naturally in conversation, if you practice with native speakers or on a language app or you listen to it on the radio or something, you're going to hear that word anyway. So that counts as a repetition essentially. So I wouldn't focus too much on sitting down and studying it and focusing on how much time you've had in between it, because it will naturally pop up if you've got exposure to language in general. However, if you want to be more scientific when it comes to learning in spaced repetition, you can use an app called Anki, which essentially is flashcards where you put the words in to the app on your phone, and then it times how long it's been until you reviewed it. And if you've got say 30 or 50 different words, it will show you it every day based on what words you need to review. It might say, oh, you need to review 2 words you haven't looked at recently. And that's one example. So it's called Anki as an app. I'm not sponsored by it or anything, but I just find it really useful. Next point is, if you want to make it easy to learn a word, learn it in context. Applies to phrases too. One example is, you might have been on holiday in Spain if you're learning Spanish, for example, and you might be at a table and you want to know what the word is for, oh, can I have the bill? Or the bill, please. It's la cuenta, por favor. However, you've learnt that you don't need to know exactly what it means, but in context, you've sat there maybe at the dinner table and you're working out, how do I say this so I can impress my friends, or I can have a go at speaking the language. So when a waiter or waitress comes across, you can say, oh, la cuenta, por favor. And they're like, ah, see, and they go away. And you're like, okay, that's cool, that works. So that is so much better than just looking at, like on a table of common phrases, la cuenta, por favor. It doesn't really have much significance or context. You're not associating context with it. However, when it's in a place that you'd use it, so on holiday, or or anything really, the bill please, or how much is this, if you're at a local market or you're shopping for food, how much is this, or it's too expensive, or can I get a discount, things like that, phrases as well. If you learn it in context, or you imagine yourself there, or you have an opportunity to go abroad and speak it then, that's perfect. Or even when it comes down to singular words, if I want to learn the word apple, for example, don't just learn the word apple, try and use it in different sentences. I might say, this apple is red, or I want to eat this apple. So very, very simple, but it could be an idea. Or like the word for car, this car is fast. If you incorporate or package a word into a phrase, then that has more meaning to you because you have emotions behind what that phrase means to you, if that makes sense. Personally, I remember a time when I went to visit my girlfriend's family in Italy and I was sat around the table. I didn't understand the difference between different types of way you can say good. So one is buona and one is bene. So buona can be used to describe food, or like an item of like, oh yeah, that's good, it's tasty, it's nice. Whereas bene can be just like, oh yeah, like good, or like it's good to eat, it's safe in that sense. Any Italians watching, forgive me for my pronunciation. However, I was at this dinner table and they had pizza. And then one of them said, oh, it's very buona. And I was like, ah, okay, so it wouldn't work for bene. Bene would mean like, yeah, it's good to eat, or like, or the alternative is bad to eat, like it's gone off. But buona means it's tasty. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. I haven't heard it used in that context before. And I've tried to associate that. I've tried to learn it grammatically myself, but I remember that moment now because it was in context. So that's an example of how learning a new word or phrase in context can stick with you. It's got an emotional attachment to it, which helps your brain to recognize that as important and store it in your long-term memory. Okay, so the next point to help you learn more words in less time is active recall. So that means that instead of, naturally you might see like a grammar book or an exercise book or something, or ChatGPT for common words and phrases you might want to use. However, if you just look at it and say, okay, tree, hedgehog, and bus, random words like that, it's not going to work at all. However, if you have a go at recording it. So if you learn the word boss in Spanish, for example, and then you look away and you try and record it, or a day later you try and remember what it is before you look at it, that is more effective because essentially it's getting your brain into gear to try and pull the information from your brain. And that makes the connection for that word in your brain stronger because you're telling it, look, I want to retrieve that word, I want to use it, rather than just passively looking at it. Because if you're passively looking at it, it requires less effort mentally in your mind. You'll find this because it's easier to just look at a word and not try and remember it. As soon as you try and remember a word, it becomes harder. You have to think a bit more. But that thinking requires effort. But that effort help you to pass that word into your long-term memory and solidify it more. So it's one of those things where if it takes more effort, it's more effective for you going forwards because you have learnt that word in a better way. So rather than just looking at words and staring at them on a piece of paper or on your computer, if you try and actively recall what you think that word is, and you might get it wrong, but that's fine because the next time when you say, oh, that's what it is, that's cool, then that will make your memory of that word stronger because you got it a bit wrong, but you've corrected yourself. And that now tells your brain it's important because you put effort towards it. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. In summary, you can get your brain to remember more words and phrases in less time. There's a few techniques that you can do to work alongside your brain to work out how it works, how it thinks, and you can use that to your advantage. Once you know how it works and how it thinks, you can use that to help yourself get closer to your language goals. Now, YouTube is really good at recommending content that it thinks you will like and find valuable. So in my top left or right, you'll see a video that's recommended for you. So if you want to get closer to your language goals in less time, I recommend you go and watch one of them now. Thanks. Bye.